listening to The Edge, everything bass fishing, coming to you worldwide from Megaware KeelGuard Studios.
Aaron, here we are for another great episode of BassEdge Radio, buddy. I'm excited. The March 1st episode, banging out another one. 371. What you got, my friend?
Well, hopefully a great show, Kurt, because I was kind of perusing the lineup, and we're going to talk some tech stuff. We're going to dive off into some spring fishing. But before we do that, I noticed that you happen to be, I think, maybe at a boat show, and some lucky winner got a Megaware KeelGuard.
Yeah, super cool, man. I did a kind of an in-house boat show over at the dealership Outdoor Specialties that I work with, you know, when I get my Rangers and all that kind of good stuff. And man, it's just a great group of folks over there. They decided to have a kind of just a personal dealer show. So we gave away a lot of stuff. I mean, they gave away a ton of stuff, but it was cool to have Megaware involved, and they gave away a KeelGuard to one of the lucky attendees, and we gave some seminars. There were several pros there that just talked bass fishing, and it was just kind of one of those great get-togethers that perpetuates excitement for the season to get kicked off, right?
Absolutely. And of course, we bring up Megaware because, as most may know, 371 episodes, all of them have been brought in part by Megaware KeelGuard. And Kurt, we're going to be talking a little bit about another one of their products a little bit later in the show, so I'm excited about that. But, you know, like we mentioned, bass season, bass fishing, bass tournaments, whatever you want to call it, is well underway. I know you said you've seen some lizards out there running around, so spring is probably, temperature-wise, is a little bit closer at your house than in mine being down in South Texas. But, you know, I saw where our guest that we had on February 1st, just killed it down at Rayburn with a big bag. And then, of course, John Cruz did something that's pretty unique.
We talked about Dakota and his numbers of tournaments that he fishes in that episode. And, man, he's just been strung out on the events, right? He's got the Pro Circuit under his belt since then, a BBT under his belt, a Toyota Series where he had a 29-pound 5-fish limit. That was super cool to see. And then, of course, you know, Fork now under his belt with another BBT event. The guy is just nonstop. So he's just fun to watch. A lot of fun to watch. But yeah, as you mentioned, St. John's River, you got John Cruz, man, going wire to wire.
That's so cool, especially down in Florida, Kurt. I mean, that is just not easy. It's hard enough to do just in general, right, to put those kind of things together. But anyway, just happy for John, you know, certainly kind of a veteran or an old guy like me. I'm not necessarily a veteran. I'm just old, but you know, you're a veteran and old. So I
Well, let me say real quick, you know, John took the punches, man. You know, you had John Cox down there, of course, you know, Florida native, had a 31-pound bag. I think that, you know, he just wasn't able to capitalize on some of those spawning fish because that last day of the event, it was cloudy and stuff. But then you had Bob Downey, another Elite Series angler, threw another punch at John Cruz with a 29-pound bag on the last day. And I'm sure just tensions were high for John. But like you say, just a big-time veteran and 10 years since his last win. So that was super cool to see him take that title. You know, talking about big fish, Aaron, what about some crazy big fish catches there at the Bass Pro Tour event over in West Monroe, Louisiana? Were you able to check some of those crazy catches out?
Yeah. You know, Kurt, I don't know if it's just because of the increase in exposure in social media, but it seems like we are exposed to more of those now than what we used to be.
Absolutely. You got Randy Howe breaking the record. I think it was a 10-10 or 10-11 one day, and then the next day or 2 days later, they were Bussy breaking the championship. He catches a 12-13. I mean, what a freaking slaunch. The cool thing about that is the state of Louisiana, you know, the opening that lake, it was donated through a paper mill, right? It was like some old paper mill land or something, and they donated it back to the state, and the state made it basically this bass factory. Kind of just crazy how quickly these big bass just show up when you have these new fertile, fresh fisheries.
Yeah, I mean, there's not going to be too many times. We talk a lot about the core, right, stepping in. We've probably seen the last lakes ever built, right? Thank God for Teddy Roosevelt back in the day with the TVA and that. But, you know, for something like that, the state of Louisiana to do that, and then corporate getting involved and kind of being more from a private perspective, again, just providing tremendous opportunity for both the locals and now on the national scene. I mean, and certainly, like you speak of, we're seeing the benefits of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, we got a lot of benefits coming up in the show, Aaron. Another full slate of great anglers. We're going to have the Bass Pro Tour champion from Louisiana with us today. And we're also going to continue with that special segment. We're going to talk about some batteries, boat power today, which is so critical. So y'all stay tuned. We've got a tip coming to you right now from ProtectTheHarvest.com. BassEdge Radio continues. Stay tuned. This episode's ProtectTheHarvest.com tackle tip with BASS Elite Series Pro, Brock Mosley.
Hey guys, if you've been keeping up with me over the last few years, you know I like to throw a chatterbait. Usually if I'm on camera or doing well in the event, there's a chatterbait on my front deck of my boat. And one thing I want to talk about is attacking different depths. Here in the spring, fish are moving shallow, then moving back out slowly to the depth. So one thing I like to do when I'm attacking, let's say 0 to 3 foot of water, shallow water, one thing I like to do is my chatterbait is adjust my trailers. I like to use a Yamamoto Seiko. If I'm up there in that shallow water, I like the kicking Seiko. It's got a paddle tail. It don't get us deep in the water column, and it's got a lot more kick to it. That way it stays up in the water column. You can fish it a lot shallower, not have to reel quite as fast. When I'm going a little deeper, let's say that mid-range, 3 to 6, possibly 7 foot, that's when I go back to the other Seiko with just a swimming tail, where it don't have as much kick, don't have as much stump. It's able to fall a little bit in the water column, getting a little deeper. I'm able to reel it slower. It's one of them things that lets the bait kind of fall back to you a little bit. And then, if I'm going deeper, I've even thrown chatterbaits on ledges. And one thing I'll do, increase the size of the weights. They got chatterbaits now that go all the way up to an ounce to an ounce and a quarter, even bigger. One thing I like to do is increase the size. And when I throw my bait out there, if I'm fishing 8 to 15 foot, I'll let that bait fall all the way to the bottom. And I'll let it fall on slack line. That way I know when my line stops falling that bait has reached the bottom, and then I'll just slowly return my tree. So one thing I would suggest, play with your trailers to see what's best at each depth for you. Every angler is different. So, those are just a few of the key things that I look for when I'm changing my trailers through the depths, is seeing what keeps it up in the water column the best, what lets it fall down the best. Try these tips. And I hope it'll help you catch a lot more fish on chatterbait.
There you go. That is a master's class on chatterbait fishing and depth range. Brock, thank you so much. With this tip brought to us by ProtectTheHarvest.com.
First by land and now by sea. For years, Lucas Oil has been a staple in high-performance vehicles on both the road and track. Now, from the makers of Lucas Oil comes Lucas Marine products, specifically engineered for marine applications. Protect and lubricate your marine inboard, outboard, or high-performance boat with Lucas Marine Engine Oil or Lucas Synthetic-Based Oil. Learn more about the complete line of Lucas Oil and marine products. Visit lucasoil.com.
Nitro Performance Bass Boats. Get pro-level performance with the Nitro Z18, the official boat of Major League Fishing. The Z18, with its nimble handling and versatility, sports many of the features in the larger boats in the line, like a Guardian Live Well, a heavily insulated cooler, dual 8-foot rod storage, and our smooth and fast NVT hull. Every Nitro boat is laid out to do one thing very well: catch fish. Enormous front decks, up to 45 square feet on the Z21, allow maximum mobility when battling unruly bass, and feature low-profile gunnels for ease of skipping, pitching, flipping, or landing fish. Nitro Performance Bass Boats, pure fishing machines.
Aaron, once again, bringing in another experts in a newer kind of technology over the last 5-6 years, and to some kind of a confusing technology, but something, Aaron, that is critically important for our boats, and that is power. Lithium versus AGM batteries. How much power do we really need to have adequate juice for the cranking battery, graphs, trolling motors? So BassEdge brings to you Pate Schumacher from Battery Outfitters Pro Guide Batteries. Pate, thanks for bringing your knowledge to BassEdge.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on today. I'm excited to talk with you guys and talk about power solutions, AGM, lithium, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Pate, because like Kurt had alluded to there in the introduction, I mean, and I know you're an outdoors guy, hunting, fishing, ranching, all the power needs, but specifically we're going to be talking more along the lines of the bass boats, right? With all of the technology and graphs and everything, the requirements and the demands that are placed on the battery supply. I guess let's first just kind of talk about the differences between, the sizes, the group 24, 27, 31. These are all available in AGM and lithium. What are those numbers meaning to the consumer?
Yeah, that's a great question. As a battery guy, I kind of take that information for granted. What that is essentially, it's called a group size, and it's just a uniform number for sizing for applications. So, you've probably seen 24, 27, 31. There's different tray sizes. So essentially, those are just physical sizes that are then named. And as that number gets bigger, so does your capacity. So does your allocated CCA, your reserve capacity, your amp hours. Essentially, back in the day when it was all only lead product, the bigger the case, the more lead you could have inside that battery and the more power you would have. The more lead, the more power, the heavier the battery was, the stronger it was. And, that still holds true today. So with a Group 24, you're traditionally going to be 800 cold cranking amps. That's a good starting battery with a limited number of reserve capacity. So Group 27 is kind of where you would jump into the deep cycle side or a bigger starting battery. And then a Group 31 would have even more reserve capacity. Traditionally would be a deep cycle or even a dual purpose with starting and deep cycle capabilities. So that spans back from the 70s and 80s with a really good flooded lead acid battery, and it's transitioned to AGM as well.
And that takes place with the lithium too. So is it fair to say that, if you can afford the 31s, go 31? Or is there a situation where maybe you want a 27 or 24?
Yeah. So traditionally with a flooded lead acid battery or an AGM, if you can fit a 31, that's going to be the best bet because you're going to have that available power. Now, there's always circumstances where maybe your fishing style doesn't need that much energy and you could get by with 27s or even 24s. And again, it really comes down to the ratings on the battery that you're looking for and your fishing needs. It's not so much of this guy's a Group 27 customer, a fishing style is a 27 or a 31. But 9 times out of 10, if you can have more capacity, that's going to be the best solution. But it's not always the case, depending on your fishing style. But like you said, it does translate to lithium. The interesting thing about lithium is that as a chemistry and a battery type, it is far more energy dense. You can fit so much more capacity in the same size cases. Traditionally, you would get an AGM, and I'm going to use, there's different terminologies that are out there, like reserve capacity, cold cranking amps, amp hours. So cold cranking amps is really just the number for starting, and reserve capacity is the number of minutes it runs at a specified amperage. Traditionally, it's 25 amps. So that's a term that was used on the flooded side, but when you move to AGM and you move to lithium, there's really nothing that's any more listed in reserve capacity. It all translates to amp hours.
Okay.
Yeah. So with a Group 24 and a lithium, for instance, you might have a really, really good AGM that's rated at, let's say, 75 to 80 amp hours. And that's a good Group 24 AGM battery. You could fit 80 to 120 amp hours in a Group 24, depending on the chemistry type, the type of the cell, the physical size of the battery management system. And in that same size case, you could have a lot more energy, which is great. Sometimes there's other reasons why you would push that up to a 27 or even a 31. And a lot of customers are used to buying a 31. So they're looking at that size saying, okay, I want this and all of the features that come with it. They have that size trays already and so on and so forth. So lithium as a whole is far more energy dense, and the different group sizes are really just based on industry standards when it comes to lithium, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So would it be fair to say that if I'm looking at amp hours in the lithium world and I'm looking at the, like you say, old school lead, flooded acid, reserve minutes or minutes of that's running, which I've learned something already, that it's a standard 25 amp draw. That's what gives you the industry standard of reserve minutes. Is the amp hours and reserve minutes really kind of, not saying it's a apples to apples comparison, but it's kind of reflective of the same draw of power that's available through that particular battery. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, sir. So It's just two different ways to rate the amount of energy that battery can deliver over a determined amount of time.
Gotcha. So going back, like you said before, maybe an angler doesn't need a 31 group size battery. Maybe they can get away with a 27 or a 24, depending on what their functionality is, their fishing style, maybe how much they're using their particular product. Also in this situation, then the more amp hours I have, I'm getting a more robust piece of power, and more reserve minutes, I'm getting a more robust piece of power for my boat. Would that be correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And that brings a great point. Depending on your fishing style, if you're out there just really running the banks really hard and you're using a ton of energy, you're going to want as much amp hours as possible. And how that plays into the life of that battery for you, the angler, is the higher the amp hour means that the lower or the depth of discharge is taken. So for instance, if you had say you had a 70 amp hour battery and you needed 60 amp hours to get through the day, just hypothetically speaking. So every day you go out there that you fish and you're taking 60 amp hours out of the 70 amp hour battery, you are really taking that battery down to a really low depth of discharge. Okay. And if you had a group 31 that would say 100 amp hours and you took 60 amp hours out, you'd only be taking it down to 40%. And the lower you take that depth of discharge, so the lower you empty that tank, the less cycles overall you're going to have. And that's for lead acid, that's for AGM specifically. And for lithium, it does equate the same way, but the number of cycles that lithium can provide comparatively is just so astronomical that the common angler wouldn't notice that. But especially when it comes to a flooded or an AGM battery, if you're really cycling batteries hard, that higher amount of amp hours is going to allow that battery to recover better, and you're going to have more cycles over the life of that battery.
Yeah, that's good stuff, which leads me to kind of a question for you, Pate. The lithium technology, none of these batteries are cheap, right? And so that's kind of why we're coming to you for guidance.
Right.
Specifically on the BassEdge boat, we've got the power pull charge system, right? Which you can direct power, you can convert it. It comes right off when the big motor's running. But then also another, which I would like your opinion on, one of our other partners, Megaware, makes what's called a battery guard, which is kind of a spongy mat that goes for shock resistance and just the abuse, the batteries take within a bass boat. Yeah. Do those things help, in your opinion, from what you're seeing? Do you have some real experience on improving and kind of maintaining, the life and getting more longevity out of the batteries?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two things that kill, and I'll speak in the traditional format because I understand that most customers don't have lithium yet. There's two things that kill flooded and lead acid batteries quickly. It's heat and vibration. There's a lot of things that do, but those are the two biggest things that can really hurt a battery over time outside of just not being charged properly. So to answer both of those questions, we do like that Megaware tray insert that reduces the vibration. That is a good thing to add into any boat and really any application, frankly, that anytime you can reduce shock and vibration, you're going to have a battery that's going to last longer. To speak specifically to the power pull charge, we've met with those guys. That is a fantastic piece of technology, a great product. We really like the way that it integrates with multiple chemistries and the way that can be configured. We've seen guys that traditionally, maybe some anglers that fish really hard, maybe on the elite tour or a major league fishing guy that say traditionally had ran AGMs, and with the continual improvements and desires for more on the electronic side, 3 or 4 years ago, a set of AGMs would be perfect for their application. But today, maybe running 5 graphs and a live scope or 2, one AGM battery isn't going to cut it. But when you pair that with a power pull charge, we've seen guys that have a much better success story. They can fish all day. The low voltage alarms don't go off. So we do like that product. We like how it charges and how it diverts power. The little jump start feature is pretty cool too. So we do like that product. So yeah, it's good stuff.
Pate, so much information available about this, but really it comes down to the consumer, what graphs they have on the boat, if they're running, AGMs or lithiums, what's an upgrade that's suitable for them. Maybe it's an AGM cranker and 3 lithiums or there's so many types of configurations. And that's why we're having this conversation, because it can be a confusing. You guys there at Pro Guide Batteries, you got a great distributor network to where consumers can go and get the information on hand. I think, when you get things online, there's a lot of information out there, and some of it may not be applicable to every consumer. If a consumer really is interested in taking power to the next level, which I think most bass anglers and particularly serious bass anglers are interested in because of all the technology that needs power on our boats these days, what's the best way for people to find information and get this dialect going kind of in an in-person, personal basis for this product, Pro Guide batteries? Because you guys offer it all, AGMs, lithiums. You have every imaginable product that maybe an angler would need in the source of power.
No, that's right. And what we as a battery company and a battery distributor, what we want to do is provide the customer with the best experience possible. And we believe that is through your traditional dealer network, whoever you buy your boat from, whoever services your boat. We've just seen too many times where there's just a lot of information out there, and maybe that consumer doesn't get exactly what they're looking for. So our dealer network is extensive here in the Midwest, and we really try to push the customers to that dealer network because we know that they're going to get the highest level of service possible. If you don't have a dealer network that you or a dealer that you work under, you can always shoot a message to us at ProGuideBatteries.com. There's a contact page. We're available on all forms of social media. We're really quick to respond to those. If we can help you find a dealer, great. If we're not familiar with your geographic location, we can walk through, hey, here's what the best looking scenario would be for your setup. We're constantly asking or getting asked questions about, hey, I've got 2 Garmin's up front, one on the console, and a Humminbird here at the dash as well, and one, live scope. And what do I need? And people are looking for just a quick answer. And the reality is it's not.
There's not one.
Right. There's not one. There's not one. And every customer is a little bit different. So getting that level of service from your local dealer is what we push. We can provide that through the internet, but we just truly believe that you can be better taken care of through your local Pro Guide dealer, and we can assist in any way possible. But yeah, there's so many different scenarios. What I would say today, what we're seeing, we're extremely proud to partner with a lot of touring anglers this year. And we've put together a lot of different power packages that give the consumer and the touring angler a lot of confidence in what they have. So traditionally what we're seeing right now, if you were to say what's the best setup for a guy that's really loaded with electronics, is we still believe that an AGM starting battery is the best choice, depending on your electronics load. If you're running over 3 large graphs and a live target or live scope or any of those type of active target,
they draw a lot of amps,
packages.
Right?
Yeah. If you're running that, we would say that if you have an AGM battery, pair that with a power pole charge. If you don't have a power pole charge, maybe look at a standalone accessory battery. We're seeing that become super prevalent this season. We're putting that together a lot. And then depending on your fishing style, you can look at either the PGL 24M75, which is a Group 24 75 amp hour battery, or you could step up to the 31M100, which is a Group 31 100 amp hour lithium on the trolling motor side. And even on that accessory battery, we have a Group 24 50 amp hour and that Group 24 75 amp hour. And that's been tested for the last couple of years now. Our lithium product is not one that we just found somebody that sent us an email saying, hey, would you like to sell lithium batteries? We vetted multiple factories. We've been testing product for over 5 years. We've been testing this specific product for over 2.5 years. We designed every aspect of our lithium battery, from the terminals to the cell housing to the battery management system. It's really, it's been a passion project for me because I've seen just a lot of customers that bought into a battery thinking that it was going to solve all their problems, and it created more. And, as a battery nerd, it just really bugged me. And I wanted to create a product that would actually solve problems. So, that's what we set out to do with Pro Guide Lithium. And we've got some really, really fantastic partners, and have had a really successful launch, and just look forward to helping more customers get what they want, which is to not think about their battery. That's what we know at the end of the day. You want to go out, you want to go fishing. You don't want to worry about power. You don't want to worry about that stuff. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
All right. Well, Pate, great stuff there. So many more topics that we could cover. Perhaps warrants another, sequel to this conversation. But in the meantime, we definitely encourage everybody to go to ProGuideBatteries.com. Any closing thoughts on the topics that we mentioned there, Pate, before we kind of go on to our next segment?
No, I appreciate you guys having me on. I love getting good information out there. So if anybody has any questions regarding specific battery technology or anything like that, you'd be happy to shoot us a message at ProGuideBatteries.com, the contact us page, or Instagram or Facebook. We are active there and respond quickly. So be happy to help. Again, guys, really, thank you so much for having us on.
Absolutely, Pate. Thanks for being here. Y'all stay tuned for the featured angler in the Lucas Oil Angler Spotlight. We'll be right back after this message.
This is MLF Pro Circuit Angler, Kyle Gillis.
I'm Pro Angler Bill McDonald.
This is MLF BPT Pro Jacob Wheeler.
This is MLF Pro Circuit Angler Kyle Cordiano.
I am Pro Angler Cole Floyd. Stay tuned for more BassEdge Radio.
You know the importance of protecting your investments, so why use anything else other than the original and toughest DIY keel protector for your boat, Megaware KeelGuard. Grinding sand, abrasive rocks, and concrete ramps are no match for our exclusive contoured edge and patented technology. Megaware KeelGuard keel protectors are made tough and made to stick. Their do-it-yourself installation takes less than an hour, providing the longest-lasting, most dependable keel protection for your boat, guaranteed for life. Developed specifically by boat builders offering the best keel protection in the industry. Also from Megaware KeelGuard, Skeg Guard, Flex Step Pro, and Pontoon Guard. So give your boat the performance edge. Put on the protection the pros pick. Megaware KeelGuard.
Excited to have back on the show a veteran in the bass fishing game. He spent many years on the BASS Elite Series. Actually took a Rookie of the Year crown over there when he was just a young dude. I mean, like crazy young fella. But now he's competing on the MLF Bass Pro Tour. Picked up his first big national win last month in Louisiana at Stage 1 of the BBT. Stoked to have Bradley Roy on this episode of BassEdge Radio. Awesome to have you again on BassEdge, Bradley.
Yeah, man, it's good to be back, especially under this circumstance.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Every day you're in the winner's circle is a good day. And certainly, Bradley, we are glad to have you, like you said, under these circumstances, and enjoyed watching you get that Bass Pro Tour win. Before we get straight into kind of your tournament day approach to win that event, I'd like to really dive into your preparation and how it may help you achieve this success and also future successes. What was your practice like there on Bussy Break?
Yeah, so we actually fished 3 different bodies of water in that event, which, it's kind of a unique format in and of itself. We fished Lake D'Arbonne for our qualifying round. So you got to survive it just to even move on. Then we did Caney Creek Lake for the knockout and then Bussy Break for our championship. So for me, this was an event that I really had to do a lot of research for. I wasn't familiar with any of those bodies of water, beforehand. And to me, I really felt like I needed to get down there before the cutoff. Most of these professional level tours have a 30-day cutoff or somewhere around that, like a 4-week cutoff of you can't be on the water during that time right before the tournament. So ours is no different. I jumped down there just a couple days right before our cutoff and actually went and scouted around on Lake D'Arbonne. And really for me, it was about getting around. Like Lake D'Arbonne is, where the qualifying round was super hard to get around on. They've got one boat lane that goes to the main channel. It's just super hard to get around on. So I did a lot of preparation there, just figuring out how to get in and out of the back, a lot of these places where you might catch a bass. And then beyond that, just trying to get to know Caney and Bussy, because what was interesting and made this challenging is each place was different. So D'Arbonne was shallow, cypress, docks, really shallow water fishing. And those were not Florida bass, to my knowledge. They were not Florida stream bass. And then we went to Caney Creek. It's got some offshore structure, got some grass. It is a Florida stream bass lake, got some huge bass in it, but it gets a lot of pressure. And then we go to Bussy, which is basically I think it's about 2,200 acres or something, and it's flooded cover everywhere with Florida stream bass in it as well. So each venue was so different. Just every bit of research that I could do within the bounds of our rules, I did it, because I felt like I didn't need to be behind the 8 ball on this one, so to speak.
Right. Especially the first tournament coming out of the year, everybody's extra fired up, right? I mean, it's the new start, new beginning, fresh waves. And obviously you qualified for Red Crest, coming up here in March, and you're looking to do it again, obviously, for next year. So let's talk about fish behavior perspective. Man, brutal cold front right before this tournament kicked off. And a lot of us, anglers, it can be a tough condition, especially with shallow water fisheries. But brutal cold front, even the organization MLF decided to basically eliminate a practice day because it was so cold out there on the lake. So certainly that had to kind of excite you maybe a little bit because you did such a great job in pre-preparation and pre-practice before that off-limits period. But what changes did you feel like you had to make because of this cold weather scenario that really made what I would consider a tough fishing condition there on DR Bone?
Yeah, it really was. One of the conditions-wise, one of the toughest events that I can remember. And the weights, I think, reflected that. The top end was pretty heavy, but through the field, it was kind of hard to get a bite. And, water temperatures were, especially at Darbone, and then as we moved on, they barely got to 50. Most of the time, that water temperature was just in the upper 40s. And for that part of the world, that's super cold. I mean, guys up north, I was talking to some guys, up north, they're like, well, that ain't no big deal, 45. I'm like, yeah, to your fish, in Michigan or whatever, 45's, go time. But when you're talking about Louisiana, you start talking about 45, 46-degree water temperatures in 3, 4, 5 foot of water, that's a tough deal. And for me, what I tried to focus on is I tried to get in areas that I knew had bass. And I know you think, well, you always want to fish around an area that's got fish in it, which is what we always strive to do. Right. What I was trying to do is make sure I had myself in an area where I knew there was a population of fish, and I wanted to eliminate that variable of running around everywhere, because it was really simply about trying to get one to bite, because they just weren't in a good mood because the water was so cold. So I stayed in areas that I felt like had a higher population of bass in them, and I just tried to figure out ways to get those fish to bite.
Yeah, that's great stuff, Bradley. And one of the other things, when you look back and you've put it all together, right? That's a beauty of hindsight. Help us live vicariously through you. What would you say were key instinctual moves or moments that really helped propel you to that state title?
For me, even trying to get in some of those areas, like I'll give you the rundown through Bussy Break. So we were actually not allowed to go practice Bussy Break. On one of our off days, we had what we call like a 4-hour ride through. Basically, you put the boat in, you can get no rods out, you can just ride around the lake and look at it, and you kind of have to make your assumptions or your educated guesses off just what you can see with your electronics in your eyes. It's kind of a neat dynamic to our championship rounds a lot of times. But for what I saw, I found one area that, had a little shallower water, had some deep water with it too, and it had a different variety of bushes, trees, stumps, and then it also had some scattered grass, and it was the only place on the lake I saw that was like that. So to me, in my brain, I thought, well, this is an area that's got options for these fish. Well, coming back and actually fishing the championship round, I started in that area. And for the first, I think, hour, I didn't get a bite, but nobody else was getting bit either. And finally, I did get a bite, but staying confident, knowing, man, this area's got what it needs. I just need to stay in here and really figure out how to get a bite, because my instincts and everything was telling me that there's fish there, because you have to balance that out. Now, if the water temperature had been 65 and I wasn't getting bit, maybe it's time to move on. But when you're talking about water temperatures and Florida strain bass and it's 48 degrees, you might be around them and they may just not be biting. So you kind of have to balance that out with when do I stay, when do I go type of thing. And for me, it was about having confidence in the areas that I'd picked, knowing there's fish there. It's simply about trying to get them to bite even with the cold water temperatures.
Yeah. Interesting scenario there on Bussy Break that you can't really fish from a pre-practice or a practice, right at the event standpoint. Although D'Arbonne, obviously you had that opportunity. You talked about being in some areas that had fish. What gave you the instinctual clue that they were there? Was it that you caught fish there, in pre-practice and just knew it was a general area that held fish on the lake? Or was it something that you saw in the actual event that, whether it was, seeing some activity on your forward facing sonar, or what was it that led you to concentrate on specific areas at that D'Arbonne level?
So it was really kind of twofold. When I came down for my pre-practice, a month ahead of time, I fished in that area and I got some bites. I got a few bites. It wasn't anything spectacular. But I did get a few bites. Well, it was an area that I had noticed on, Google Earth and through looking at my mapping. It was the back third of a creek that had super great looking spawning stuff around the banks. The water was about a foot low, but I knew that those fish would, had cypress and docks and some grass up on the bank. When the water rose up, I knew those fish would spawn in the back of this creek. And it was really probably the biggest or one of the biggest feeder creeks on the lake. So that obviously would tell me as an angler that there's probably some fish in that creek, because and you got a major creek like that, there's usually some activity in it.
There you go.
And then you could look up on the bank and see where they were going to spawn, but out in the middle, 4 or 5 foot deep, there was several ditches that kind of drained out of the back of it and filtered through this scattered cypress stump field. And I think those fish were just simply holding while they wintered out in there around those stumps because there's depth. They got some little channels. I would actually use my active target on my Lowrance and would look ahead of me, and I could kind of see, because those ditches were real narrow, and I could see where like a cypress would be sitting on the side of that ditch, and it would be a foot or two deeper. And those seemed like they were a little more key than the rest of them. But what tied it all together is the first morning of practice, I went in there and the water temperature 45, 46, I mean, super cold temperatures. And I pulled in there and got a bite. So that told me they were here a month ago. There's still some fish here. It's got all the characteristics of a pre-spawn area to hold bass, and that just kind of made it all click for me. And I knew that if the water did warm up, there should be more fish that would pull in there. And that's key as an angler. You always want to try to be ahead of the game, not behind it. If you can be somewhere where if they did start to move, they would move to you, not away from you.
Right, right. I tell you what, I want to pluck something out of that information you just provided the listeners, because I think there was one really key element. And we talk a lot, obviously, about forward-facing sonar, live scope, live target, the whole gamut of everything that's going on out there with this forward-facing sonar. And we talk a lot about seeing brush. You talked about seeing cypress and seeing fish, obviously, in general. One thing you mentioned there that was really key, and oftentimes people wonder just how effective this can be in shallow water, and that is you noticed the ditches and the drains, and that, you can actually see those with that forward-facing sonar. So you're not guessing anymore, well, does the creek channel run this way or that way? You basically just move in the head of that trolling motor, and you know exactly where the deepest part of that little ditch or creek channel is. And it sounds like that was kind of one of those keys for you reading between the lines. Would you agree with that? And how effective do you think forward-facing sonar is in shallow water for anglers that just aren't quite sure?
It's a big tool, and probably even more this week even opened my eyes more to it than I knew. I'd obviously used it in shallow water, but this week was it's amazing. The tool is a great deep water tool, but man, what it allowed me to do, these fish, I'm fishing a lot of the same trees over and over and over again. And so what happens is being stealthy, moving your boat around, stuff like that becomes a big deal because you have to allow these fish to set up so they'll bite. Well, if you're constantly getting too close and spooking them or not putting your bait where you need to all the time, you're not going to get those bites. So what all that did, I probably would have still got bit if I hadn't have had it, and I would have probably fished around that ditch. But we're not talking about a ditch that runs straight, just drains out and makes, just a straight line.
Right.
It made all kinds of curves, and it would kiss up against certain sides of those cypress trees. And what I was able to do is looking, 60, 70 feet out in front of the boat, even in 4 foot of water, I could see before I ever got to it which side of the cypress I needed to pitch to, which side was the shallow side, which side was the deeper side, and thinking, early pre-spawn fish, late winter, early pre-spawn fish, those fish probably want to tend to hang on that deeper side. I would pitch where that active target was telling me to pitch. All that does is makes me more efficient as an angler. It doesn't put the fish in the boat for me, but it just increases my odds and makes each cast a little better. And without a doubt, it was a big deal for me.
Great point. Before we go to break, the final day at Bussy Break, I noticed basically every angler was fishing, pretty shallow, flipping wood. Sometimes you'd see an angler, throw a moving bait here and there, vibrating jig, swim jig, something of that nature, maybe a little shallow running crankbait or something like that. You're on a small impoundment, 2,000 acres. You can see all other 10 guys, I assume, right? Or at least you can kind of break through them over the top of some of those bushes.
Right, yeah.
You stayed dedicated. You had a great first, second period. Third period, obviously, it wasn't as good for you, but you had built such a solid lead that they weren't able to catch you. Did it creep in your mind to change your focus of attack, or did you just feel like you were still in the best place to continue focusing on those shallow bushes and flipping in that kind of pattern?
It did creep in my mind to change. We battle that as an angler.
Absolutely.
But I had been, stretches without a bite before, and there was kind of one key area of that little section I was fishing that I'd really gotten most of my bites from. And what would happen, I kind of would go through it and get a bite or so, and I would kind of drift off and fish a little while, try to let it just rest, and then go back through it, and it seemed like I could get a bite. Well, what happened really in the last period for me is there was a lot more boat traffic in there. locals, and then there's other anglers. And it's, like you said, 2,000-acre lake, small lake. That stretch really never got a break. And I think those fish were obviously feeling the pressure for me and other anglers. I probably should have either downsized a little bit just to get another bite or two in that last period, or I should have tried to go duplicate that somewhere else. But in game time, we talked about hindsight earlier. In game time, that's a tough decision because
absolutely,
as time expired, I looked on and I said, man, you need one bite. And I knew if I got a bite, it probably was going to be a 4 or 7 pounder. I mean, that's the way everybody's bites have been
right.
in that area. And I'm like, I'll get one more bite. Of course, I didn't end up doing it. It didn't need it, thankfully. But probably looking back, I should have either done one of two things, either kind of downsized on my tackle a little bit or either tried to go duplicate that somewhere else.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think it's always interesting to kind of just take a peek back and see that, because maybe, we learn from those things or just kind of understand some different aspects that could have potentially crept into place. But the key was you still came out on top. So that was the key. Well, let's take a short break. We're going to power pole down. Bradley, hang right here. We're going to pause for some messages from our partners, BassEdge Radio. We'll be right back.
Patented in 2000, perfected over years of testing and real-world punishment, the Power Pole is the ultimate shallow water boat positioning tool. Swift, Power Pole deploys in seconds from anywhere in your boat. Virtually silent, Power Pole won't spook wary fish. Secure in strong current or gusting winds in up to 8 feet of water. Engineered to take it with a lifetime unconditional replacement guarantee on the spike. Power Pole, swift, silent, secure. Visit powerpole.com to find a dealer near you.
BassEdge Radio is presented in part by Mercury Marine. Go boldly, returning with MLF BPT angler Bradley Roy in the Lucas Oil Angler Spotlight. That's right, Lucas Oil High Performance Marine Products. Be sure to visit the BassEdge.com store. It works.
Bradley, certainly other people in other parts of the country here in March are going to experience, some of those final cold fronts throughout the year and kind of have that same fish behavior scenario that you saw there in Louisiana at that BBT event. I remember, growing up in Virginia, we would always have some crazy, weird March cold front before spring finally sprung. I'm sure there in Kentucky, you see that all the time in March as well. But lure selection and how you change it up throughout the time, DR bone on that stumpy impoundment, caney, and then obviously bussy break fished probably a little bit similar to DR bone because it's so shallow, but caney fished a little differently. How are you going to change up, and what kind of tactics do you like to utilize from a lure perspective, retrieve perspective when you're targeting these, pre-spawn fish that have just been kind of knocked back?
Right. So, one of the things that I felt like that week, super cold temperatures, we had a really, for lack of a better term, crappy cold front that just, hit us right before that tournament. To me, what happens is, our most favorite times to fish, everybody loves to go out, throw a big spinnerbait, crankbait, when they eat a vibrating jig. Those fish are active. Those fish are really in a good mood. We love catching fish like that. We've all had those days. But the fact of the matter is we can't do that all the time. We just simply can't. We can't set it up where a tournament lands on those days. So whenever you go out and the cold fronts come through, and as spring progresses, the cold fronts will matter less. But especially in that, late winter, early pre-spawn period, it's real easy for them kind of to revert back to their winter habits where they just kind of get in a bad mood again. And I did two things. I tried to, when I was presenting bait, without trying to get a reaction, I tried to present not a very invasive bait. And what I mean by that is, a lot of times I'll pitch a crawl with a big flapping trailer or a jig with a big flapping, chunk on the back of it or something. I caught a lot of them flipping a trick worm, just a 6-inch trick worm. It's a bait that every bass in the lake will eat when it sees it, but it's just not real loud, doesn't move a lot of water. And I felt like that was something that if those fish, saw it, it wouldn't be so invasive or so intrusive that they wouldn't eat it. On the flip side, when I went to the knockout round on caney, you can take the other approach to it when fish are a little lethargic, and that is simply to get a reaction bite. And to do that, you're going to need to go to the extreme, which I did a lipless crankbait. We all know Florida strain bass, or even bass in general, when you get them around a little bit of grass, water temperature, upper 40s, low 50s, a lipless is a great way to do it. And what happens, those bass are sitting up there, they're not really in a great mood, and you bring this loud, crazy thing by them that looks edible, and you get it hung up and rip it out, and you cause them to make a bad decision because they have just seconds to do it. I had two schools of thought, I guess is what I'm trying to say, but I think that's what you have to do when you're faced with, kind of adverse conditions.
Bradley, obviously we've determined, 3 different bodies of water, different even kind of strains of bass. Caney, focus in a little bit on that, tends to, in my opinion, is probably a little deeper, clearer lake from your description. Bait selection there, can you touch on that a little bit of when you get into deep water situations, how much does that change? And then also touch a little bit on your mental piece on when you're preparing, right, and you're loading the boat and you're going to these different lakes. Do you just kind of take a little bit of everything, or did that mess with your brain at all?
Yeah. So as far as taking a little bit of everything, I take everything with me every day because you just simply don't know what you're going to get. You try to narrow it down, but especially in this format. So what Caney was interesting to be different from the other two was, you're right, it was clear water, and that was basically because it has some grass, hydrilla. I think I saw a little coontail, even some eelgrass. That filters the water a little more, so you're going to have a little cleaner water. Didn't have as many stumps. It was easier to run around on, a lot more depth. You had some humps, and creek channel drop-offs way out there. And I actually, going into that day, I was planning on using my active target, and fishing for some of those deeper fish, those fish that were in, let's say 12 to 15, 18 foot of water.
You saw a lot of anglers take advantage of that too. So, as you mentioned, there's, always several patterns going on. Did you see some of that in practice as far as potentially, it sounds like you thought about targeting some of that water?
I did. That's what I started doing. And I caught several right off the bat that just, they had to be 2 pounds to score. And I couldn't get one. All the big ones I saw, I never would commit. So as I fished through and wasn't getting any bites, I made my way up the lake a little bit, and there was an area where I'd gotten some bites out deep and knew it had grass shallow. I hadn't got any bites in the grass in practice, but the wind started blowing from the southwest. It was just kind of crashing in on that grass, and I was like, man, that looks really good. And so I reached down and grabbed my lipless, and just 10 yards or 3 or 4 casting into that grass, I had a 310 eat my bait, and I was like, well, that's cool. Let's see if it can happen again. And it didn't take long. I just kept ripping that lipless bait out of the grass, and I got like a 5-pounder to eat it. So then I've got a pattern. I'm forgetting about all that deep stuff, and I was simply just running, trying to find where the wind was blowing into that grass, and that's where I ended up getting my bites that day.
What were some of those deep bites that came on early in your day that didn't score? If you're up shallow and you're just not getting bites, you don't run into those fish like you did up there in that grass. How would you tell some BassEdge listeners to target some of that deeper brush or channel drops and that type of thing that you were talking about?
So for me, it was, I had like a Carolina rig tied on, and a Carolina rig kind of gets a bad rap. I mean, everybody calls it the old ball and chain, but
right.
Especially in that part of the world, but really anywhere I've ever been in the country, a Carolina rig is a bait that will get a bite and it will get a big bite. I was throwing a Carolina rig, throwing a drop shot, and then there were some fish that would suspend over that brush, and I was throwing a deep running jerk bait for those as well, which I think was 3 pretty good options to get bit. I just didn't get the quality bites right away that would have locked me into that.
Gotcha. That makes perfect sense. Bradley, you've competed in so many events in your career, man. You've been doing this, even though you're still fairly young fella, but you've just been at it a long time. You started so early in life with this professional fishing and fishing on national tours. What do you feel like is the key to being able to put yourself, now that you've accomplished a big national tour win, to put yourself in position to win these big events? Do you find there's a large difference in an approach? Is it momentum? Believe me, I know it's difficult to put a finger on, but it's such a potentially valuable question to be answered, right?
It is. And I think that, obviously I think about that a lot as a competitor. I'm like, man, what was different? You try to analyze what was different. And oftentimes I don't think it's a lot different. I think it's little things that make the difference. Obviously this event, I put some practice time in and some research, but I do that for most other events as well. So I think you have to do all the right things to the best of your ability and try to put yourself in position. You're not always going to catch them. You're not always going to make the cuts. That's not always going to go your way, but you have to do everything that you can control, because in fishing, you and I both know there's so many variables that we can't control. Control what you can control, and then just try to let the rest of it, I guess, fall where it may. But for me, it was just about trying to cross the T's and dot the I's that I can control and keep myself in that position. And if you do it long enough, you're sure going to win. And another thing too is, it's funny, we talked about this in another interview after I won, was confidence and momentum. It's funny that spills over to fishing. If you go out and you're fishing, and I speak a lot to high school anglers and the younger generation, if you go out and you think you're not going to catch one, by golly, you're not going to catch one. You have to, and it's hard sometimes when you're competing on bodies of water where you had a tough practice. And I know people have heard this over and over from pros, but some of my best tournaments have came from bad practices. You just have to keep an open mind. You have to fish confident, and you have to know and be confident in your abilities that, hey, if I get around a bass, I'm going to catch you. And I think that it's a lot more mental than we want to let on like it is.
Yeah, good stuff. It's a great point. I think it was both Rick Clunn and then certainly Dr. Jay McNamara, the author of Psychology of Exceptional Fishing, both said in so many words or less, if you don't think you're going to catch them, why even make a cast? They were that emphatic about it. So appreciate you pointing that out. Here we are, first part of March, Bradley, as you prepare for the Red Crest later this month. Grand in late March really sets up pretty wide open for a few, strong techniques that can be run all over the lake. What are you seeing in the crystal ball for Bradley Roy as you compete for the MLF's BPT Championship event?
I'm trying to kind of watch the weather and see. It depends on what happens right before that tournament. Those fish could be thinking about spawning. I don't think they're going to be quite spawning or really thinking about it. I think they're going to be really late pre-spawn in that part of the country. And for me, I hope that's how it sets up, because I think for me that probably sets up a little bit better for my odds to win. But I'm going to keep an open mind, because that's a volatile time of year, because it just really depends. You're talking about a week or two this way or that way, and those fish can really change their mind on what's going on. So it's just going to depend on weather, and I'm going to watch the weather. I'm going to see what happens. If we have some cold days leading up before that, maybe it's more of a pre-spawn, shallow cranking, spinnerbait type of thing. Otherwise, it could be they're a little closer to spawning. So we're just kind of going to have to see, but I'm definitely keeping an open mind.
Yeah, I think that's the great thing about a championship on Grand Lake that time of year, is that whatever happens, it can probably take place all over the lake, which opens it up for everybody. Obviously there's still some local advantage and that type of thing, but there's just so many different patterns and techniques that can occur that time of year. But once you get on the right technique, it seems like you can ride it on that lake. So it's going to be a great championship. Look forward to watching you over there compete, obviously, Bradley, and hopefully you knock it out of the park. We're going to move into the Nitro Performance Bass Boats listener question segment. This question actually comes through our Instagram page. Stephen Richter from Chemog, New Jersey asks this question. It's kind of a tough one, Bradley. Stephen says, when the water temperatures are in the mid-40s, which obviously isn't very uncommon for New Jersey, maybe a little bit uncommon, and maybe not uncommon there in Kentucky either, right? It still gets pretty cold.
No, it's not. Yeah, it gets pretty cold. Yeah.
So when water temps are in the mid-40s, where are the first places to begin looking for bass, particularly in a river-type system?
So, the first thing that I notice there, if you're asking about a river-type system, is current adds a little bit of a dynamic to it. If it's a strong current river, then I feel like those fish probably don't want to be in the strongest current when it's cold like that. They get in the wintertime, their metabolism just plummets. It hits the bottom. They don't have to eat all day long to survive anymore. So they're going to get one good meal a day, and then they're kind of going to be lazy the rest of the day. So I'm probably not going to look in the strongest of current, but whether it's a lake, river, you have to analyze what body of water it is. If it's a lake that's got some deep channel drop-offs, those fish probably move back out there to that. If it's a shallow water place where they don't have that opportunity, they just pull back out to wherever they can feel comfort. They try to get to the deepest place they can. Not necessarily the deepest place, but get to where they have an option of shallow or deep, because they can slide up and down and get something to eat. So you have to analyze the body of water you're on. I probably would stay away from super strong current, but look for something where they could have access to shallow water if it was to warm up a little bit, or have access to that deep water at the same time.
Good stuff there, Bradley. Appreciate you answering Stephen's question. Stephen, thank you for sending that in. And good news is you're going to be receiving that Midway USA gift card where you can go and buy all things fishing, hunting, and the outdoors. One thing we do need from you, and that is to simply click on the Claim Your Prize tab there on BassEdge.com, letting us know that you heard Bradley answer your question right here on episode 371, or simply email us support@BassEdge.com, and we will get that sent out to you.
And as a reminder, listeners, you want to win a Midway USA gift card? It's easy to do. Just shoot those questions through our Facebook page, Instagram, or go to BassEdge.com, click on the Ask the Pros tab, and just submit your question. If you're chosen to be heard on the show, we'll be sending you a gift card.
Well, Bradley, thanks again for being here on BassEdge, and certainly congratulations, there on that win. It's awesome to see you get that first national tour win. Do you have any closing remarks or thoughts before we move into the final segment?
No, I mean, it's great to talk to you guys. I hope that we don't have to wait this long for me to win again so we can have this conversation again.
Absolutely, Bradley. Well, it's been great to have you on the show, always bringing in the bass fishing knowledge, and we'll be certain to use some of those tips in those springtime pre-spawn, and it's going to help everybody catch more bass. So enjoyed having you here. Best of luck at Red Crest for sure. Stay tuned, folks. Aaron and I will return to close out this episode of Bass Edge Radio.
You know the importance of protecting your investments, so why use anything else other than the original and toughest DIY keel protector for your boat, Megaware KeelGuard. Grinding sand, abrasive rocks, and concrete ramps are no match for our exclusive contoured edge and patented technology. Megaware KeelGuard keel protectors are made tough and made to stick. Their do-it-yourself installation takes less than an hour, providing the longest-lasting, most dependable keel protection for your boat, guaranteed for life. Developed specifically by boat builders offering the best keel protection in the industry. Also from Megaware KeelGuard, Skeg Guard, Flex Step Pro, and Pontoon Guard. So give your boat the performance edge. Put on the protection the pros pick. Megaware KeelGuard.
The PowerPole Charge Marine Power Management Station is the most advanced system of its kind available on the market. It does the work of 3 devices, a traditional battery charger, a charge on the run, and an emergency start system, all in one compact unit. The Charge lets you run your boat's accessories the way you want to run them by allowing you to monitor and control your power usage through the PowerPole app. It automatically devotes power to the batteries that need it the most for maximum efficiency. The new Charge from PowerPole. Power where you need it, power how you need it, power when you need it.
Kurt, another episode jam-packed full of just great information. I do kind of want your thoughts on this, but I do get the feeling that there was so much more that we could have talked about concerning the batteries and the powering and those kind of things. But I feel like we only scratched the surface, but I thought it was all very good information.
We did. And a lot of that reason is because, there's so many different applications for different consumers. I mean, it's the gamut. Even when just finishing off that interview with Pate, he talked about they still recommend an AGM for the cranking battery. So, it's not just all lithiums. It's not just all AGMs. There's a combination of different things that needs to happen for you to actually understand how to get the best power for your boat. And it's a deep conversation and one that hopefully we'll get Pate back involved. But obviously, like Pate said, go to, ProGuideBatteries.com. They've got the information. Obviously, they're must be very quick to respond even on social. Must be very active there because he mentioned that several times. So I know a lot of us are involved on Instagram and Facebook. So make sure you reach out to these folks and just learn more. Even if you're not in the market to purchase, it's good to understand that way when it comes down to if having some power issues with your boat, that you've got contacts for people that have the knowledge to answer the question correctly.
Yeah, for sure. And then we had the angler spotlight with
Bradley, yeah, that was a great interview
with Bradley Roy. Yes, and it's so fun when people look forward to talking with us, Kurt, because that means that he actually did very well at that tournament and obviously won it. So it was kind of neat to hear from him.
Yeah, and what was super cool about that from my perspective is just hear him talk about the excitement of having the opportunity to catch some really big fish. This time of year, the early spring, even in a extreme cold front situation like he saw with that Bass Pro Tour event, not a lot of bites, but dude, I mean, he caught some megas. He caught, and there were some other guys in that tournament that caught giant fish, so it was really cool to see how he attacked it. Although he knew maybe he wasn't going to go out there and get a lot of bites, he concentrated in a particular area where he knew had migration routes, some of the targets structure and cover that he knew would have a population of fish around, and then kind of stuck to it. Changed up some of those presentations, but caught some big freaking fish, which everybody loves catch big fish.
Of course. And, everybody loves gaining that knowledge. And I guess, Kurt, we need to kind of shut this down so that people can get on with their days and hopefully put some of that knowledge to work,
yes.
right? So
I'm ready to hit the water.
Me too. For BassEdge Nation, be sure to stay on all things BassEdge through all of our social media platforms, BassEdge.com, the store, all kinds of great stuff there. And in the meantime, we look forward to March 15th around the corner. We'll have another great episode, and keep sending in those listener questions for your chance to win the Midway USA gift card if your question is chosen. For Kurt Dove, I am Aaron Martin. We look forward to seeing you March 15th. So long, everybody.
The Edge is presented by Megaware KeelGuard. For more information on BassEdge or to shop at the BassEdge online store, visit BassEdge.com. And be sure to join Kurt Dove and Aaron Martin right here on another episode of The Edge, brought to you in part by Nitro Boats, Lucas Oil, ProtectTheHarvest.com, Midway USA, Mercury Marine,